Hello and welcome back to Inside Update, a show brought to you by InsideInvestigator.org, a nonprofit newsroom working to root out corruption in the state of Connecticut through investigative journalism. My name is Connor Dragotis. I'm the managing editor here. And today I'm joined by Mark E. Fitch, our senior investigative reporter. You know him. You love him. It's 2025 now. This is the first episode we're doing in the new year. And Mark has a heck of an investigation to kick off the new year as well. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Lamont's State of the State speech. But first, I need to, of course, address the elephant in the room. Mark, I'm a treadmill desk guy now, and there's just no getting away from it. This is who I am. So I need you to accept it. It is. It's tragic, but it's -3 degrees outside. So I really didn't feel like I could get my well-being any other way. This is a New Year's commitment for me, other than fantastic investigative journalism. How's 2025 kicking off for you so far?
Well, it's freaking cold. I'm sitting here in this ancient apartment building that acts as a giant brick sail for the Arctic winds that are blowing against it. I'm freezing. I have electric heat. My electric bill's insane, which kind of leads us into our story.
It really does. So the title of the investigation, which came out on the 5th, so last Sunday, again, first investigation of 2025, it's called The Authority. PURA chair secretly issues decisions under secretary's name. This has been a live wire for you for a while, back in 2024, as you were working to finish this thing up. Bring us up to speed on what you found.
Yeah, this was a difficult story to write because it's very nuanced legally and administratively. So basically what's happening is the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority chairwoman Marissa Gillette has been acting as quote unquote presiding officer in all these docket hearings and things of this nature. And as presiding officer, she has been issuing intermediary decisions. And these intermediary decisions can be decisions of substance. They can involve finding of fact. They can involve, legal, decisions, things like that. And when she issues these decisions, she's not attaching her name to it. She's attaching the executive secretary's name to it. Now, in the past, this has been done a long time. Yep. In the past, though, when it was just the executive secretary's name, it generally meant, a decision by the full commission. So all 3 members. Or it was ministerial or administrative. So if one of the utility companies needed an extension or something like that, it'd be like, yeah, it's fine. Here, stamped by the, executive secretary. But what the utility companies are claiming is that Gillette has issued about 5,000 decisions across 535 dockets just using the executive secretary's signature. And of those, roughly about 1,000 were substantive decisions. And why it matters to them is that if they knew it was a decision by the presiding officer or the hearing officer, that's a whole section in the story, but we'll get to it. If they knew it was a decision by the presiding officer, they could have appealed that decision to a full vote of the commission. Since they were under the impression that this was already a full vote of the commission, they had to just deal with it and take their complaints or their problems to Connecticut Superior Court. And so that's the situation that they found themselves in. And it basically is just pointing out that, or alleging that Marissa Gillette is essentially single-handedly running the entire regulatory authority.
And this is far from abstract. And I think this is something that, when I first heard about this story, I was like, oh, okay, we're about to get into some pretty heavy legal stuff that is going to take a lot to unpack. Like, what does this actually mean for a real human being? And the one that stood out to me is, of course, this $70 million decision. So I'll let you explain the details there, but suffice to say, with a single stroke of the pen or digital signature, $70 million was added to ratepayers' bills. I'm understanding that correctly?
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah. So this involves the extension of the COVID era moratorium on electric shutoffs another year. So in 2023, uh, this PURA, through Marissa Gillette as presiding officer and under what they call it, just under the executive secretary's signature alone, extended the COVID era electricity shutoff moratorium basically another year. And that decision alone added $70 million onto the public benefits charge that we're all paying right now, including myself. My public benefits charge in December was $100.61. And part of that is paying for that $70 million extension. So, yes, this does affect ratepayers. There was no vote taken by commissioners, nothing. And this was, there was a letter sent from Representative Jonathan Steinberg and Senator Norm Needleman, who are the chairs of the Energy and Technology Committee, to Marissa Gillette saying, we think this COVID era moratorium should be extended. 3 days later, there's a Gaudiosi ruling. Yes, that's what they call them, the Gaudiosi rulings. And it was done. That's it. And it's not the only time. There was also a Gaudiosi ruling that essentially held millions of dollars in credits that were due back to customers.
Yep.
For 2 years. So instead of the money being returned to them as a credit on their bill the way it should have been, Gillette, through issuing this Gaudiosi decision, withheld that money for 2 years so she could use it to offset any future rate increases. But it really messes up the cash flows for these utility companies. I mean, they have to be able to balance their books, and it just kind of screws up the works. And one of the more interesting ones that I found, and this was another Gaudiosi ruling, Avangrid accused Gillette of being biased against them and of illegal communications with another office. They made that accusation, and they get a Gaudiosi ruling saying, no, there is no evidence of bias and there's no evidence of outside communications. But that was, again, a Gaudiosi ruling issued by Gillette alone. And we know this because the utility companies filed a Freedom of Information request for any votes and communications with the other commissioners on that specific motion,
Yep.
and there were none. So it essentially Gillette investigated herself, determined she had done nothing wrong, and then told them so. Without actually signing her name to the document. So I think you can understand that, maybe things have gotten a little too casual over at PURA at this point. The rules exist for a reason. You're supposed to follow them.
Well, I know we can't get into every element of the electricity discussion in Connecticut, but my understanding is that one of the, just a few weeks ago, the credit downgrade was a big piece of this. So basically, correct me if I'm wrong here, but a credit downgrade means that, as you put it before, the cash flows are going to result in basically a bigger overhead for the companies to undertake various projects, and those costs get passed on. So sure. Because and some of the decisions that were made under the Gaudiosi signature resulted in the credit downgrade, which resulted in even more costs being passed on to ratepayers. So it's kind of a snowball effect here as well, right? I mean, ratepayers are not out of the woods. We can't expect this to go away. Connecticut is still going to see these costs continue to build, and that'll be reflected in people's bills, correct?
Yes. So, okay. I mean, the credit rating downgrades for the utilities, I mean, some of our lawmakers and our Office of Consumer Counsel are saying it's much ado about nothing. It's a term that they've liked to use throughout this entire issue is, this is nothing, it's a nothing burger, blah blah blah, whatever. Well, if the state of Connecticut's credit rating was downgraded, it'd be a big problem, right? Because it increases your borrowing costs and it shows that maybe you're not on the best financial footing, and so for, yes, the utilities. If their credit rating is downgraded, it's going to cost them more to borrow money, and you have to borrow money to build and to make capital investments and things like that. And those capital investments are paid for by right here
Yep.
and my wonderful Eversource bill. So yeah, there is an effect. There is a downstream effect to those credit ratings. And I think really the fact that it's having that kind of effect on both Avangrid and Eversource has really sparked them to start putting up a real fight.
Yep.
And I've got it on background that they say, you know what, we're not letting this go. We've had enough. I know that there's been meetings at the governor's office where everybody brought in their attorneys and all sat down and said, we think this is a problem. So we'll see. I plan to follow this as it plays out in court. I think it's kind of fascinating, and PURA itself has become such a political show at this point, because of that public benefits charge that the utility companies had gone to PURA saying, hey, we need to be reimbursed for this stuff. And they kept putting it off. They kept kicking the can down the road until we finally got this huge public benefits charge this past year. And, that's when you start seeing PURA in the news a lot. And, the Republicans are trying to make a lot of hay out of it. They want the governor to appoint the full contingent of commissioners, which is 5. For some reason, he's not doing it. Which makes no sense whatsoever. And there have been legislative attempts to, essentially, give more power to the chairperson. And at this point, the governor appoints every single commissioner. So they serve at the will of the governor. He can get rid of them. He can appoint them. That makes it a political office, and that's really not what it's supposed to be.
Right. Well, so let's move a little bit because, as you pointed out, supposed to be 5, only 3, and Lamont brought this up in his State of the State yesterday, right? He kind of just said he poo-pooed it away. He said this isn't going to fix the problem, and then he laid out, I guess, some ideas related. But the bulk of the effort to make a fix here seems to be coming from the legislature itself, right? All of the proposed bills came out yesterday, and I don't know if they're not checking for duplicates or what, but there were a number of people who brought up decoupling PURA from DEEP and other efforts to try to bring these costs down. But I know you watched Lamont's speech and had thoughts on it as well. So I don't know if you want to bridge that gap or just talk about the speech generally, but give us your thoughts.
Well, yeah, he did. He's like, oh, it wouldn't make a difference if there's 5 commissioners or what. Well, it is statutory. So, like lead by example. And also, we need the state through its regulatory body and the utility companies that provide us this power to be working together if we're going to actually lower costs. So, Lamont, to his credit, mentioned supply, which Connecticut is in desperate need of. He mentioned building new nuclear reactors. That would be good. I mean, although we do have to remember that part of this public benefits charge is the power purchase agreement we have with our current nuclear, reactor. Yes. He mentioned possibly natural gas, which is the cheapest source of energy and the majority of Connecticut's energy. And then he mentioned wind power, which, those power purchase agreements are at least double what nuclear is. And there's a lot of building that has to go on for wind. And we're not going to see even if they got all of that up and running, we're not going to see the downstream effects of that for years. And like I said, the energy is just more expensive. Is it carbon free? Well, I mean, kind of if you discount all the building that goes on. But, the wind blows and it generates some energy, but that energy is expensive. So I don't know. Most of Lamont's speech, it was very light on policy. He was putting it all on the legislature saying, hey, you guys figure it out.
Yep.
And Lamont's never been one for giving the strongman speeches, but this one, even for him, was light. So, yeah, I mean, energy costs are going to be one of the big things this session, and we've already seen multiple bills filed, and yeah, there's always duplicate bills and all that kind of stuff. It's just normal. And they'll all get
It just
combined
took me so
into,
much longer to go through the list, Mark. I was like,
yeah,
I've already read this one.
what you're really going to have to look for is which ones are actually brought up for public
Yep,
hearing before the Energy and Technology Committee, and that committee is going to be probably the one to watch this year.
for sure. And I also think it's important to note, obviously the headline of the article that Catherine wrote yesterday was Lamont address takes victory lap, but light on policy.
Yeah.
And, we weren't the only ones to kind of flag this in the news ecosystem as well. I mean, the Mirror put this out, the Examiner put this out. I was joking like, man, we ours was first to print. I wish someone else found a more unique headline, but all of these were kind of echoing the same sentiment. But I wanted to flag in there these North Stars.
Mhm.
So Lamont talked about affordability and opportunity, but as a lot of folks pointed out, there didn't seem to be a lot of clarity from him about what that actually means. It was kind of like, hey, we want to create a better system, but again, like you said, kicked it down to the legislature. I'm guessing that we will do follow-up coverage on kind of what those specific plans are. I think both Republicans and Democrats have plans that they want to lay out and have different versions of what those words actually mean in practice. Do you have any insight, though, as to what you think will be successful or topics that will rule the day here?
I mean, energy is, I mean, you're talking a big topic there. Housing will probably come back.
Mm.
The transit-oriented development, that's always, there's always a big push for that. The
And
fiscal
education. Of course,
educate,
I want to
the,
talk about
okay.
education. Can we do that?
Yeah,
Because
let's do
I,
it.
I feel like this is something that you did a really good job writing about, but also I think you pointed out something that not everyone did when they were writing about the higher ed deficit. I won't bias it anymore or offer any more of my commentary, but you wrote a piece that came out yesterday morning uh, pointing out some of the problems that are going on, or I guess the underlying structural issues. Lay it on us.
So the Connecticut State Colleges and University system. So all of the state universities and community colleges, they've got a structural deficit. So this
Yep.
is an ongoing $150 million a year deficit, and the real question is what's driving that deficit. And it's two major things: declining enrollment, which they've actually seen turn around this past year. They actually
Yep.
posted a 4.5% gain, which is nice, but they're still down like 30%,
Yep.
So obviously a whole lot fewer, tuition dollars coming in. But then they also had to contend with the state employee raises passed by the legislature in 2022. And so that added, I think it was $63 million onto their total cost. And then they had to contend with 1 year, a 27th payroll just because of the way the months span out, which
Yep.
added another 25 million. So they had this like $88 million increase. And that doesn't go away. That's there.
Yep.
And what those state colleges and universities are going to have to contend with in the upcoming session is a new contract, a new state employee, wage contract, and here's the thing is, these raises get passed, and they're not small raises. You're talking, a 2.5% general wage increase plus a step increase, which is about another 2%. So you're about 4.5% per year, compounding over 4 years. It adds up quickly. So what they're going to have to be contending with is another wage agreement in this next session. The Lamont administration's clearly having to negotiate with CBAC about this, and they're going to have to weigh its effects on higher education, which is coming to the state with its handout year over year over year.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things to bear in mind is that the General Assembly occasionally shoots themselves in the foot with this. It's one of these like self-imposed crises. It's, hey, we're gonna, government is made up of people. That's its primary thing. And so salaries comprise a huge amount of government spending.
Hmm.
And so when you raise that, you have to know that those agencies are going to be coming back to you saying we need more.
Yep,
And if you can't look that far down the line, what are you doing?
for sure. For sure. I also don't want to dismiss out of hand too the fact that, CSCU, despite asking for a lot of money, has not been out of hot water themselves about some fairly lavish spending on meals, limousines. There was discussion about all sorts of things. So I don't know, pot calling the kettle black to a certain extent here, or at the very least, I think some healthy eye rolling as those hands are outstretched and everyone's pleading poor at the moment.
Yeah.
They're at the end of the day, right? I mean, as a nonprofit, the vast majority of our business, our money is tied up in people, right? As you
Yes.
pointed out, like if you have a business that relies on people doing things, you have to take care of those people. You want them to make more money. You want all these elements. But at the same time, we can't overspend our budget. Like I'm just imagining, kind of what this would look like. The email that we send at the end of the year asking for money, like, hey, we kind of blew it by 30%, guys. Can you help us out?
Well,
It's not a good look. But we have a finite pot of money that we pull from. We rely on voluntary donations from donors. That's not the situation that the legislature or CSCU are in, and it is changing those dynamics. I don't think that can be ignored.
Well, and Connor, if you were taking limousines to and from work the way that CSCU Chancellor Cheng was doing,
Yes.
let's just say you'd need to work on your walking skills a little bit more. So
Yes, with darn good reason. Mark, this is why I work at home, because otherwise, of course, I'd be taking a limousine to the office to work with you every day. This is just
naturally.
absolutely vital to my well-being. If it's not going to be a walking treadmill, it's going to be a ridiculously expensive limousine. I could probably get a full-time driver. You'd support that, right? You're...
Oh, well, not me, but our generous donors.
Exactly. Exactly. I guess that's probably a good place to leave it and remind people that we are a nonprofit that relies exclusively on the generous donations of folks who voluntarily give to support our mission to root out corruption in Connecticut. And, all jokes aside, we are demanding of ourselves when it comes to how we spend our money and what we invest in. This is, one of the core things that I think makes our business work is that we dedicate ourselves to financial responsibility, and we make sure that every single dollar is stretched to make sure that these stories of corruption and information that is vital to rooting out corruption in the state of Connecticut is invested properly in people, in outreach, and frankly, just providing the best service to our readers. Mark, do you have anything else before I just sign off with a brief thank you?
No, and back to the energy question. I just think, right now what we're looking at is the state regulators and the state utilities are like two divorced parents, and, all us ratepayers are kind of like the children caught in the middle. And so they're going to have to learn how to get along if we're actually going to address the energy needs of Connecticut going forward. Because right now the legislature wants to turn everything electric. I mean, they came this close to making everyone buy new electric vehicles in a few years. So if they want to be able to do those things, you have to be able to get your utility companies and the state on the same page when it comes to moving forward. So hopefully they'll be able to figure something out this session.
Absolutely. As always, please, if you know something that is going wrong in your community, send us tips at insideinvestigator.org. There's also a place to submit tips on our website. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, for tuning in. We're excited for 2025 and all of the investigations that we have scheduled out for you over the next few weeks, months, and years. We are a nonprofit. Please consider donating to help us root out corruption in the state of Connecticut. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and until then, be well, stay safe, and stay informed.